Okay, so morning, everybody, and we're in our series, Bridging the Gap, or Why Good People Do Bad Things, and we had already three mechanisms that we talked about, trying to understand why good people sometimes do bad things. And perhaps we said if we understand those mechanisms better, we have a better chance of obviously avoiding them, but making this world a little bit better. One of those mechanisms relates to a tragic story, took place just a couple of months ago on the November 30th. Yuval Kestelman, a 38-year-old Israeli, resident of Mevaseret Zion, was a lawyer working as a public defense, served both in the police and Mishmar HaGvul, and there was a terrorist attack at the entrance to Yerushalayim. I don't know if you remember that. And in the morning, and he happened to be there. He saw the two terrorists, and he was able to neutralize them. He killed one of them, and at that time, another soldier, Israeli soldier, in Miluim, Aviad Frija, happened to be there, and he happened a minute or two later, and he saw this guy with a weapon, and he shoot him. So Aviad killed Yuval. And obviously very, very tragic story. He, mistakenly thought that he was the terrorists, hence killing him. So this is an example for somebody who was trying to protect. Aviad was trying to protect. He thought that this guy is a terrorist, therefore neutralized him, killed him. He didn't think for a second that might be the person who actually neutralized the terrorist. Another story, a couple of them, but another one also sticks in my mind, took place in October 18th, 2015. Gunmen shot and killed a 19-year-old Israeli soldier, Omri Levy, in a bus station in Beersheba. After killing the soldier, he took his automatic rifle and fired into a crowd. Obviously, that was a terrorist attack. When more security officers appeared, the gunman fled, but was killed by security personnel. A 29-year-old asylum seeker from Eritrea, Haftum Zarum, was mistaken for a second shooter or a second attacker. He was shot 8 times by police and was kicked and beaten by 4 Israelis as he lay wounded. And that was a big deal because there was people taking videos of that, and it was on social media, and so the attacker, the terrorist, was killed. However, Haftum Zarum was mistakenly identified as a second attacker, which led to his killing as well. So both stories, we're talking about good people, right? Good people that wanted to stop a terrorist attack from happening. They wanted to protect innocent people, made a mistake in identifying who the terrorist was, and killed an innocent person. And this phenomena is connected to this realization or understanding of our sages, Chazal, has to do also with Parashat Bo and the Exodus from Mitzrayim. So we talked about that that evening, that night of the Yetziat Mitzrayim several times, a couple of contexts. But when Moshe tells Bnei Israel about Yetziat Mitzrayim and how to prepare themselves for that night, it's the 10th plague, it's the Exodus. He gives them a couple of instructions. He said the following. ויקחו להם שא, איש לבית אבות, שא לבית. Bnei Israel are commanded to take the lamb, the Paschal lamb, one Paschal lamb, one korban per household. And indeed, Moshe and Aaron command the people, mishchu ukhu lachem seh tzon, v'shachatu ha'pasach. Take for yourself a lamb and slaughter it. That's good. That's going to be the Paschal lamb. And later on, the commandment continues that you need to maintain the seh, right, the lamb until the 14th of Nisan. Then you shecht it, and then you put the blood on the doorpost. Babatim asher yochlu otam bahem, in those houses where the Korban Pesach is going to be eaten. And that's exactly what Moshe says. Ulkachtem agudat ezov utvaltem min adam. Okay, follows the instructions. And later on, just like he was commanded, Moshe tells the message to eat the meat, right? They have to consume the meat during that night in order to allow the mashchit, whatever that means, right? We're going to talk about it in a second. The killing of the firstborn, right? The 10th plague. And what we learn is that the blood on the doorpost is supposed to serve as a sign, right? So these are the Jewish houses, and therefore the mashchit, whatever that means, is not going to enter Pasach, right? This is where the word that we use for, called the holiday Pesach. And this is, right? Ufasach Hashem ala petach velo yitena mashchit lingof. This is going to be the sign. This is how the mashchit would know not to go into that house and move to the next house where the Egyptians are and kill the firstborn. Right? We're all familiar with that story. Nothing here. And inside all this, among all those verses, all this parsha, there's one pasuk. One pasuk that is interesting. Moshe adds one instruction that he was not commanded. It was not told. So again, they were commanded. God says to Moshe, you need to take the lamb, you need to keep it, you need to mark the doorposts. And here Moshe adds another detail. Ve'atem lo titzu ish mipetach beito ad boker. You're not allowed to leave the house until the morning. Where is it coming from? If you look at the verses, God didn't say that to Moshe. It's not there. They were commanded not to take the meat, the Korban Pesach, out of the house. But nobody said that people cannot go outside for a night spazier, or a little whatever. Which brings a question, what is going on here? Why Moshe add that detail that people should not leave the house if God didn't command that? So you can say, okay, for practical reasons, Moshe understands that they need to leave soon. And if people are allowed to leave the house, that means this one is going to go to friends, and this one is going to go to the health club, and this one is going to go for a little night spazier, and this one is going to go jogging and whatever. Start gathering the people when you have to leave Egypt at night. Not the greatest idea, Cell phone reception was not that great at that time. So, it's not that you can send a message to everybody, hey, we're leaving, get your, yeah. So maybe that was the rationale behind. However, thank you, Steve. The Gemara in Baba Kama says the following. Amar Rav Yosef. Rabbi Yosef said the following: what's the interpretation? What's the meaning of that pasuk? You shall not leave your house until the morning. And the Gemara answers: Kevan shenitan reshut lemashchit eino mavchin ben tzadikim lershaim. Once the permission for the destroyer, the mashchit, was given, that permission was given, eino mavchin does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked one. Why do we need to stay home? Because the destroyer, the mashchit, has that permission. Once that permission is given, it does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked ones. Even though God said to Moshe, I'm going to pass over your houses. I will protect you, so you're not going to be affected by the 10th plague. Moshe says there's no such mechanism that can distinguish between the righteous and the wicked ones once power is there, once the permission to exercise power. Rashi on this pasuk says the following. He quoted the Gemara, and the Gemara adds another sentence. Lo od, ela shematchil min hatzadikim tchila. Not only that there's no way to distinguish between the righteous and the wicked ones, he might start even from the righteous ones. And Abaye in the Gemara try to explain how come, why. And he says, Tivuta hi legabayu. He says, sometimes the righteous ones prefer not to see the Pu'anut, not to see that tragedy, and therefore God have mercy on them and harms them first. Okay, that's trying to explain the rationale behind that.
If they wanted not to see, they should stay in the house.
Well, he's not talking about that. He's talking about the principle. Now, Moshe is talking about that, but he says, once there's power, there's permission to destroy, to exercise violence out there, it can harm both the righteous ones and the wicked ones.
But the people that are going to be meandering around, they're looking, they want to see what's going on. That's why
maybe it is. But the point is, once you're outside, well, maybe. That's the whole point. Yes. Well, technically supposed to be the Egyptians, right? The wicked ones. However, no, correct, the firstborns. However, I guess that's part of the program. Look, we know, I don't know much about angels, but the one thing we do know about angels is that they have a task, a very specific task, part of the program. But let's think about the principle here, not the details, right? So what Moshe says to the people, stay at home so you're not going to get harmed, says something very interesting about the nature of those destroyers. It says, look, power, especially power to exercise violence, kind of is once that permission is given, that power is released, like in outside, it might harm innocent ones. Once we exercise power or mashchit, that type of power that has that violence connected to it, it has a price. It has a, let's be clear, potential price. So one of those mechanisms that sometimes good people do bad things is that permission, lemashchit lehashchit, that the destroyer has that permission to exercise violence. There's no doubt, in order to stop a terrorist attack, in order to stop a murderer, you need to exercise power. You need to exercise force. You need to sometimes use your gun. But you need to understand that once you do that, innocent people might get hurt. You might miss and hurt somebody by a mistake. You might identify an innocent person as a terrorist and kill that person by mistake. And those righteous people, good people that want to stop a terrorist, killed an innocent person. And so, what?
I think it's a very bad shower. I mean, it's bad.
Why?
Comparison. Bad comparison, because one is a mistake. Mistake.
Correct.
Error.
It's always a mistake.
Error. It's not a commission.
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's always a mistake. If I'm
a better example would be United States troops in Vietnam. They went into a village and they killed, they wiped out the entire village. Even though there were maybe 3 or 4 Viet Cong there, they wiped out the entire village. Get to the 3.
It's the same principle. The principle is the same principle. They didn't want to kill the other ones. They wanted to kill those 3. But they used force. That force, we can debate whether it was justified or not. But they used force by permission, because there are soldiers in the battlefield that were supposed to do. Maybe they didn't think it through. Maybe they did some. But once the permission is given to use force, there's a good chance, or not a good chance, but there's a chance that for casualties, for innocent casualties. When Aviad Frija shot Yuval Kestelman, he was 100% sure that this was a terrorist. He would never shoot Yuval Kestelman had he known that was an Israeli that stopped the terrorist. It's the same thing. It is. That's exactly the point. It's a good person making a mistake.
But it's not like a good person stealing money from the United States government.
No.
That's it.
Correct. 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 I'm talking about a mistake, and a mistake that could happen under those circumstances when we exercise power. Self-defense is different. So, well, to some extent it's connected, correct. But it's a little bit different, because if I think that the person has come to kill me, then okay, that's self-defense. Here I'm trying to not to protect myself, I'm trying to protect others around me. It's a little bit different.
It's walking into situations and not appraising it properly.
Correct. It's walking into a situation, not appraising it properly. That's exactly the story. But it's not only that. It's, if you go back to Moshe, he says, listen, people, I want you to stay home, because once you go outside, I can't guarantee that there are not going to be any casualties, there are not going to be any innocent casualties. That's the principle here. So Moshe says, stay home. I don't want to take any chances.
You could have said that you're a Bukhari.
Okay, that's true. But
you know, if you were a second child, probably say,
true. But
much street fight, I don't know.
correct. But you know what? I mean, listen, I don't know what was going on in Moshe's head at that time, but it might be that it's not only that he's afraid of the mashchit, that angel specifically, it's a little bit broader, meaning somebody, you know, an Egyptian that like was just like his family was just hit by that, and he's super angry and upset and whatever, and he see a Jew on the street, and okay, so it's not necessarily have to be a firstborn, right? Once that stuff is happening, it's not safe. Accidents could happen, mistakes are going to take place, etc. Even if it's necessary. It's necessary. Both Aviat Frija and also in the case of Haftum Zaru, those guys were trying to stop a terrorist. It was necessary. What's the other option?
But I understand they're confused. They thought that this is the.
Of course, that's the whole point.
The uniform is about the same, but in return, it was children and mothers.
What's the difference? It doesn't matter. We're talking about the principle. It's not the details. Just focus on the principle.
A better example would be the Arab terrorists that would semi-neutralize, that would lay on the ground, not a danger to anybody, and an Israeli soldier shot him.
Well, that's the story of Haftum Zarum also. That's a little bit different.
That's a good point. Now snap, and he shot not innocent, he shot a terrorist that was disabled, that was on the ground.
Correct. No, but that's a different story, because just to play devil's advocate, or he's a terrorist anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not exactly the same, but the story of Yuval Kesterman and the story of Haftum Zarum, they were completely innocent. They had nothing to do with that. Okay, let's move on. And the Gemara in Baba Metzia talks about Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That was a very special person. I want to learn with you that passage from the Gemara, okay? Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, we'll do it in English, found a certain officer whose responsibility was to arrest thieves. And he said to the officer, how are you able to arrest them? Aren't they likened to beasts, as whatever gives a text in which all the beasts are, or whatever? In other words, how can you do that? It's very hard. It's a hard job. How are you able to do your job? I'm trying to skip here. The officer said to him, but what should I do? It is the king's edict that I must arrest thieves, and I'm performing my job to the best of my ability. Rabbi Elazar said to him, come and I will instruct you how you should do it. At the 4th hour of the day, enter the tavern. When you see someone drinking wine, holding his cup in his hand and dozing, inquire about his background. If he is a Torah scholar and is dozing, assume that he rose early in the morning for his studies. If he is a daytime laborer, assume that he rose early and performed his work. And if his work is at night and no one heard him working, it is possible that this is because he draws copper wire, which is a form of labor that does not produce noise. And if he is none of these, he is a thief, and you should arrest him, as it can be assumed that he was awake the previous night because he was stealing, and that is why he is now dozing off. Okay, this is the suggestion that Rabbi Elazar gives to that officer. Fine. The matter of that advice of Rabbi Elazar was heard in the king's palace. And the king's minister said, let the reader of the letter be its messenger. Meaning, since Rabbi Elazar offered this advice, he should be the one to implement it. So they brought him to the authorities, who appointed him to do this task. And he proceeded to arrest thieves. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha sent Rabbi Elazar the following message. You are a vinegar, son of wine. Meaning, you are wicked in comparison to your father, the righteous Rabbi Shimon. Just as a vinegar is spoiled wine. And he says the following, until when will you inform on the nation of our God to be sentenced to execution by a Gentile king's court? Rabbi Elazar sent a message back. I am merely eradicating thorns from the vineyard, meaning I'm removing the wicked from the Jewish people. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha sent back to him, I guess they didn't have cell phones, let the owner of the vineyard, i.e. God, come and eradicate his own thorns. You don't do that. Let God take care of that business. And the Gemara relates, one day, a certain laundryman met Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, and called him vinegar, son of wine. And Rabbi Elazar said, from the fact that this man acted so insolently by calling a Torah scholar this way, one can conclude that he is a wicked person. And he told the authorities, arrest that man, and they arrested him and condemned him to death. Afterwards, Rabbi Elazar regretted his hasty decision, and he went after the laundryman in order to ransom him and save him from execution, but he was not able to do so. He read the verse, okay, verse. Ultimately, they hanged the laundryman. Rabbi Elazar stood beneath the gallows and wept and said, our teacher, let it not be bad in your eyes that he and his son engaged in horrible acts with a young woman on Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Elazar, when he heard that, he said, okay, I feel a little bit better. But nevertheless, his mind was not calm. Okay, interesting story from the Gemara. What is the Gemara is trying to teach us? This is Baba Metzia 83b. So the Gemara says the following: we can't have a society, we can't live like normal people without mashchit, without authorities, without somebody who has permission to exercise power. Every person needs to do that to a certain degree, but we have to remember that even the righteous ones can sometimes harm when that happens. The point, the kind of like the nucleus of this debate between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yoshua is this question, this issue of exercising power. On one end, when the permission is giving, there's no distinguish between righteous people and wicked people. Rabbi Elazar, who was a great tzaddik, made a mistake as well. Good people might get harmed in the way. However, on the other hand, we can't live in an anarchy. We can't, let wicked people do whatever they want. So Rabbi Elazar says, Ani mechalek kotzim. I remove the thorns from the vineyard. I'm getting rid of the wicked people, the criminals. Somebody needs to do that. Rabbi Yoshua says, that's up to God. It's not our job. Both positions are understandable. I understand the need to exercise power, but I understand also those who don't want to do that, don't want to be the ones to do that. There is no capital punishment in Israel except for two categories. Holocaust, it's not mass murder. It's Nazis, and also in the army. It was never exercised, but in the army, army military. Correct. Well, technically, the Manuk, John, that was also they sentenced him for death, but it was never, because there was an appeal, and he went to be sentenced in I think it was Russia or no, Canada.
I have a question.
So, but it was so. Sometimes what he says, like, that desire to fight evil is the evil itself. The fact that I want to stop that terrorist, I might end up killing somebody else, an innocent person. We just need to identify this mechanism. I'm not saying right or wrong. Correct. But still, tragedy happens. And that's exactly my point. This is a bad thing. Somebody innocent got killed.
But he also
Killed innocent people, correct.
the ratio is not so terrible.
I don't care about the ratio. I'm saying, like, The fact that innocent people got hurt is a tragedy.
Side effect of the war.
But it's different than a person willfully doing a bad thing.
I'm not doing a bad thing. I'm trying to stop a terrorist.
Different than somebody who say is a good person, but he cheats on a tax.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about my cases. I never had the guy that cheat on his taxes.
Was there any question about killing the master of the extermination?
It is. It is. Okay, but that mistake is a bad deed. Killing person is a bad deed. I don't care if it's mistake or not. Okay, go talk to the bereaved family.
Was there a question killing Eichmann?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah. That's different. That's self-defense. That's self-defense. That's a different story. I want to continue. Just let me just continue what we're going to finish here. Taking it to the next step. The Chazon Ish wrote a book called Emunah u'Bitachon, Faith and Confidence. And he gives a very interesting definition to the question, what is morality? And he says the following, מחובות המוסריות, שישתדל האדם לטעת בלבבו. I should have translated that to English to see what's going to happen here. Translate it on the... One of the basic principles of morality is, שישתדל האדם לטעת בלבבו את העיקר הגדול הזה, okay, that one should learn and observe that principle, following principle, לדעת מיהו הרודף ומיהו הנרדף. Who is the chaser and who is the chasee? That English word?
Yes.
Chase. Okay. כי לימוד המוסר מנחיל אהבה וחמלה לנרדף וחמת מרורות לרודף. Wow. Because if you really understand the essence of morality, you understand that there's love to the one who is being chased and the opposite for the one who chases. What is morality? Chemla ve'ahava, compassion and love for the one who is being chased. Vechamat merorot larodef, and the opposite for the ones who chased after. In other words, in the situation where I have such a case, and the moral person aligns himself with the one who is being chased, that is morality. Let me explain. Let's take the case of Yuval and Aviad. Yuval was chased by Aviad. Somebody that arrived like a second later doesn't know the situation, right? Need to assess. Comes the Chazon Ish, says you need to line yourself with the Nirdaf, with Yuval. Why? Because he's being chased. I don't know what's going to happen, but there's a chance that there's going to be a mistake here. There's a chance that a tragedy is going to happen. Therefore, you stay there. And then he continues. What tragedy, great tragedy it is when people switch and confuse the chaser with the chasee. I said, this is where tragedies happens. Aviad thought that Yuval is the one that was to be the terrorist. but he was actually the chaser of the terrorists. So if automatically you follow the Chazon Ish approach, you would say, okay, this guy is being chased. What is going on here? It's not automatic. The same goes, by the way, in the case of Yuval Kestelman. Yes, he chased after the terrorist. In that case, he was right, but the next one, somebody was wrong. So the great tragedy is happening when we mix the two. What happened to Haftum Zarum on that day in Be'er Sheva? He was chased. Terrorists wanted to kill Israelis, a guy from Eritrea, whatever. He didn't care. He was the chasee. He happened to be in the wrong place, in the wrong time. He could have been killed and harmed like everyone else. However, because of a mistake, he was identified as the chaser, as a terrorist. Instead of aligning with him, what happened is that they identified him as the murderer. They switched the rodef and the nirdaf, and they killed the wrong person. Moshe says, "Kevan shenitna reshut lemashchit." Actually, the Gemara says, "Reshut lemashchit lehashchit eino mafrid ben tzadik verasha." Once we exercise this power, the right for, let's call it, violence or power, there's no way to distinguish. There's no way for 100% that things are going to be exactly as we want. This is why Moshe says to Bnei Israel, you stay home, even though he was not commanded. And if we think about it for a second, it's really radical. Because that principle, Moshe says, that applies to God himself. Who sends that angel in Egypt? The Mashchit? God. Can't you program it, the angel, in a way that is not going to harm innocent people? The fact that Moshe says, I'm not taking any chances, Kivyachol, Moshe says, that mechanism applied to God himself. Even when God is involved, mistakes could happen. Alachat kama v'chama, how much more so when we talk about human beings. God says, I'm going to pass, right, in Egypt. And Moshe says, I'm not going to rely on that. How many times, unfortunately, people lost their lives because of friendly fire? The last thing they wanted those soldiers to do is to kill their friends. Friendly fire. That's a great example, unfortunately. They thought they were doing the right thing, shooting at the enemy. So what's the solution? I don't know. We don't want to live in an anarchy. The solution of Rabbi Yoshua, let God deal with that. It's not enough. I recognize, I understand the necessity of exercising power. But we need to understand that always there's a risk. And therefore, and this is what every Israeli soldier learns during training, we're never eager to hold the weapon. You don't do it with like this sense of simcha. You do it because you have to. You never attack without fearing that, there's a chance I'm going to make a mistake. Before Yaakov meets Esav, the Torah says, Vayira Yaakov vayetzer lo. He was frightened, and then he was in distress, anxiety. And Rashi explains, Vayira shema yehareg, vayetzer shema yaharog acherim. He was concerned, obviously, maybe he's going to get killed. Last time he was talking to Esav, Esav wanted to kill him. But vayitzer lo, he had anxiety because he was afraid he's going to kill others, innocent people. We talked about haba leorgecha ashkem leorgo, that self-defense. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to kill somebody who's there to kill you. So the question is, why vayetzer lo? Why he's anxious about that, Yaakov? Because of that continuous fear when you hold a weapon and it might end up doing the wrong thing. Now, it doesn't stay in the realm of theory. Chazal take it to halacha. They apply it on a practical level. So, for example, one may not daven with weapon. I'm not talking about now it became very, in to daven with a weapon and take a selfie about that, whatever, all that kind of stuff now. But I remember even when I was in the army, so we always had, because you're supposed to be with your weapon on you all the time. So we had if we stop on the side to daven mincha, for example, or something like that, there was one guy who was watching everybody's weapons, and then we daven mincha and we took our weapon back. You don't daven with a weapon. And many ask, why? I mean, we're not supposed to, at least. We're not going to kill innocent people with weapon. We just defend ourselves, right? It's against the enemy. In a similar way, a weapon is muktzeh on Shabbat. I'm not talking about situations in which you need to carry your weapon with you on Shabbat. But the Gemara says, unless it's for protection, just because you want to carry your gun, if there's no threat, you're not allowed to. Right? It's a muktzah. Well, soldiers supposed to carry their weapon because they are in situations that endanger their lives. But if a soldier is not, so for example, I'm not talking about now we're in time of war, but if a soldier spend the weekend at home and it's not time of war and there's no reason for that soldier to carry his weapon to shul on Shabbat or whatever, they shouldn't. Now it's time of war. It's a different story.
But on October 7th, they have their weapons all in one place.
Correct. It was in one place because we don't want people to carry guns when it's not necessary. Nobody thought that's going to happen. That's part of the tragedy. Correct. And maybe Rabbi Shimon has a mechanism that distinguishes between the criminals and the innocent people, whatever, the drinking and that kind of dozing in the middle of the day. But we can see that even that didn't help him, even though he thought he had a mechanism, it failed. And the problem is, so if I'm kind of summarizing it, Yes, we have to do that. We have to carry weapons sometimes. We have to use our weapons sometimes in order to protect others, to protect ourselves, to, to make sure that innocent people are not killed. However, we need to also recognize the risk, recognize the danger that is associated with that. And if we don't understand that and really understand that, then we might end up we might be good people who do bad things. One of the main criticism, I don't know if the trial was over or not with Aviad Frija. I didn't follow, but one of the main criticism was that Yuval Kestelman, when he was able to neutralize the terrorist, he actually followed the protocol. And the protocol was he opened his shirt to show that he doesn't have any lay on the ground. And he screamed, "I'm not armed." I'm in Hebrew. "I'm a soldier," blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to go into what the court decided and all that kind of stuff because I don't remember. But the point is that if you understand that notion and that responsibility, even if you come to do the right thing, like Aviad Frija, but you are a little bit more concerned about the risks, he might have noticed that protocol and listened to Yuval, and perhaps we could have avoided that killing. Sometimes there's a notion that, and again, you can't judge people in that situation. He thinks it's a terrorist and he just reacts. But I think what this principle and what Moshe is trying to teach us, and what the Gemara is trying to teach us, and what the Chafetz Chaim is trying to teach us, is take a breath. Just pause for a second. Had Aviad paused for just a split of a second, maybe not, but maybe he was able to notice the protocol that Yuval followed and say, "Hey, maybe this is not the terrorist. Maybe there's a way to get closer to him and ask him, or see something before I act." Had the people in Beersheba, in that mall where Haftum Zarum was killed, bothered or stopped for a second and looked at him and saw that he's not armed, maybe his killing could be avoided. I get it. It's extremely stressful situations. I understand. And sometimes you don't have time. And if you're going to take your time, you're going to be dead. So you have to react. What I'm suggesting is maybe there's a little bit of less, I don't want to say the word enthusiasm, but perhaps sometimes there's lack of this notion of this extra layer of carefulness that should be associated when we have the right authority to exercise power. Perhaps if we're a tiny bit more careful, tiny bit more concerned about that mechanism, we can avoid tragedies. And this is the mechanism that we're talking about today. Yes.
What is your opinion about what's going on in Israel about the ultra Haredim and the army?
Okay, I don't see it connected to what we're talking about today.
I know, but I thought it was
I'm finished, but I'm still if anyone has any comments or questions about this.
I still think it's not a good example. It's like a surgeon makes a mistake in surgery.
Right, and that mistake could cost somebody's life. Correct.
It's a mistake.
Correct.
It's not
But mistake could cost somebody's life.
different than a surgeon operates on somebody, make money, and the patient doesn't, the operator on.
Correct. I agree with you, but I think the principle, correct. But I'm not talking about bad people. I'm talking about good people. Aviad Frita is a good people, is a good person. The soldier in Beersheba is a good person. They were trying. Correct.
Different than the surgeon that operates on somebody.
I'm not talking about those people.
And gallbladder takes the gallbladder.
Correct, but I'm not talking about those people. That's not our series. Our series is not dealing with bad people. We're talking about good people.
Surgeons are good.
Only good people. Those soldiers are good people that were trying to avoid a terrorist attack or to neutralize a terrorist. Something went wrong in the process and an innocent person was killed. The surgeon intent is to save life. He is a good person. Something went wrong in the OR and somebody, as a result of that, died on the table. This is why it's a good analogy. They're both good people, have good intentions. The result was something bad. It's a mistake. It could happen to anyone, yes. But the outcome at the end of the day is that that patient is dead on the table. The outcome is that Yuval Kestelman is dead. The outcome is that somebody was killed from friendly fire. The intention was good, is to fight the enemy. Mistakes happen, and that's exactly what Moshe says. Once I give you the permission to shoot, well, he's talking about something else, but once the permission is given to shoot, casualties could happen. Innocent people could die in the process. Good people that go into the OR, something might happen. That's the mechanism. Yes, Nikki.
Well, his example, the surgeon in his example was a gunner. It was different.
Well, that was a bad person. We're not talking about those.
Talked about that. So
No, we're talking about good people.
So your example of the surgeon was different. It was about a good person with
Correct.
good intention. And his example was of a when the
Correct.
operation that
Correct.
was defeated.
Correct.
It was
These are
not-
all mistakes. These are all mistakes. Innocent mistakes. But people pay with their lives sometimes when they're innocent mistakes. Hannah.
You're wonderful now by proving to them, telling us everything. But I have a question. How do we really answer the question of Balaam the father shared our law? Because we don't have this much time to calculate, should we do the killing or not?
Again, there are no rules about that. If the principle is very simple. If you feel that you are at risk, right, and you're gonna get killed unless you act, then you have to act. There's no doubt about that. The question is, what is the psychic that that you're doing it with? Are you doing it with concern? Wait, am I 100% sure that this person is going to kill, like is about to kill me? Or am I a little bit too comfortable with this? You know, it's like, oh, I got a gun. I'm not taking any chances. That's exactly the question. Let me just stop. That question, by the way, came up a couple of times here in America. People have the right to defend themselves, obviously. And what happens when somebody, a burglar, comes to your home? So without getting into, and by the way, the law differs between different states here in America. In some states, you're totally fine. Somebody broke into your home, you can shoot him, no problem. The fact that they broke into your property, that's already an intent enough that you don't need to take any chances and you can shoot at that person. Different states in America says, no, it's only if you think that he is going to kill you. Because if it's, for example, it's clear that that person is there to steal your money, obviously you're allowed to tell him, listen, I have a gun, get out of here, like threaten him, that's okay. But you're not allowed to shoot him to kill. Obviously, if that person, for example, is not armed. Right? Because if that person is not armed, then he's not threatening your life. So there's a fine line here. But that's exactly the point. The point is that these are exactly the two notions that I was talking about. Once the permission was given, like, I have the permission to carry a gun, what am I doing with that? When a burglar comes to my home, am I just take the gun and shoot him? That's Texas, for example. I'm allowed to do that in Texas because they broke into my house, and therefore I'm allowed to shoot them. No questions asked. Or California and New York, for example, only if you think or you're convinced or whatever, or you think that there is a threat to your life, you are to use your weapon. That's exactly the point. Correct. You have to be, but it's a very delicate balance. You got to be very careful, but not in the account of risking your own life. It's a very, very delicate balance. Almost impossible. And Moshe says, it's impossible to do that. Even God, so to say, Kivyachol, cannot do that. To maintain that balance. This is why Moshe says, don't take any chances. Don't leave the house. That's exactly it. Yes.
An example.
Let me just stop the recording here. There we go.